Hello, everybody. My name is Khurram. I'm your host. I'm the CEO and founder of Neighbors. We are a digital-first extended warranty company. Our goal is to provide peace of mind, fastest claims, and the smoothest customer experience. So with that, I welcome you to our very first Neighbors podcast. And, I'm very excited. This is the first customer special. So Charles, I'm going to introduce him in a bit, but Charles, you're going to go down the history books with us. So thank you so much, for doing this. So this podcast, we have designed it to focus on our service provider partners. And the reason for that is basically the inspiration came from President Roosevelt's quote, which says something to the tunes of, "It's not the critic that matters, it's the man in the arena." And our MSPs and resellers are the men and the women in the arena. They're out there facing the real challenges of technology adoption, deployment, and maintenance. It's a very exciting space. So with that, let me introduce our very, very special guest, Charles LeVoir. A couple of things about Charles. I've known Charles for a while now, and a few things that I've noticed. He is an astute observer. He is very high energy, so I'm not even going to try to match his energy. And what I love about him is that he's a real human being. I mean, being a leader in this field, he's very approachable. You can guess why he's there. He's here on the show. So, Charles, welcome to the podcast, and thank you again. Let's start with you first before we talk about Cadan, the company that you're president of. Tell us how you got into the IT industry. Tell us your story and why you're still here.
Yeah. Khurram, thank you again for the opportunity to be your inaugural guest on the podcast. It's an honor for me, and I'm really looking forward to having a great conversation on a number of aspects of IT, the IT landscape today, especially as it relates to managed IT services. But just a little bit of background on me and how I got into IT. It's actually it's a pretty funny story in that I worked at Best Buy as a teenager, and my first position at Best Buy was at a retail store, and I was a cashier. And all I wanted to do was get onto the sales floor. That was my dream, was to get onto the sales floor. And at that time, funny enough, selling extended warranties was a big deal. And it still is for Best Buy, but then it was really everything. And so I asked the sales manager for that location that I worked for, "How do I get onto the sales floor?" And he said, "Charlie, sell extended warranties." Okay. And so that's what I did. I just started selling extended warranties like crazy at the register, and I was beating everybody on the sales floor at selling extended warranties, and I had 30 seconds at the register after they had already made their decision and said no to everybody else. And so they had no choice but to put me on the sales floor, and the first open position was computers and home office, is what it was called at the time. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the technology. I fell in love with all of it. I really enjoy learning about new technology. I really enjoy understanding how technology applies to life and to organizations. And that was the spark, and that really hasn't ended to this day. So I was fortunate enough to be able to be offered a position at Cadan Technologies 20 plus years ago. It was a very small organization at that time. I believe I was the fifth person added to the company, really because the principal at that time just needed an extra set of hands. And my career has grown from there.
Wow! Such a fascinating story. Thank you so much for including that, and the extended warranty part. I had no clues. So actually, that's a very good point. So tell us about Cadan then. I mean, you were an early employee, and what was it like back then? Where are you? Where's Cadan today?
Yeah, great question. I started really being I actually started as a technician building computers. And at the time, white box computers were all the rage. This is during the late 90s, early 2000s, when you could still make money selling hardware. In fact, hardware was so profitable, you would give away services in order to sell hardware. It was that profitable. And so my entry to Cadan Technologies was building computers, and I did that for a few months and transitioned into the business side, doing sales and account management, and learned all aspects of the business from that point. And again, that was the time where hardware and software sale and resale was extremely profitable, and organizations were kind of knocking down your door to get their hands on the next generation of software, the next generation of hardware. I've been through many cycles since then, and today we're really in the opposite, where hardware is a lot less profitable and services is where the lion's share of the profit is generated. So the industry's really flipped from that perspective.
Wow. So is cloud done, or do you still see customers out there that need to be pushed onto the cloud?
Yeah, it's a great question. If you asked me this 5 years ago, I would say that the lion's share of most organizations are still kind of afraid of the cloud. They don't know what it is. They're afraid to let their data go there. They don't want to lose the control that they have over their environments over the cloud. And there's a lot of misunderstanding and some fear around that. And it's really flipped today. Now we're seeing organizations asking, should I move to the cloud? And they mean their whole environment from front to back. And the answer is always the answer for many things is neither. It's somewhere in between, right? Not all workloads belong in the cloud. Not all organizations should move their workloads to the cloud. So we're definitely seeing more reception in the business community to moving to the cloud, primarily, I think, because of the shift to Office 365, and their email's already in the cloud, and OneDrive, and Google's been doing it for years. And so there's that familiarity that it's not scary, that it does work by and large really well. There's some benefits to it. And so we see the marketplace has shifted, but maybe too much in that we're seeing organizations seriously considering or actually moving all the way to the cloud. And really, not all workloads belong in the cloud, and not all organizations are a good fit for cloud. The reality is, cloud's really great when it comes to being able to rapidly scale up and down. It's great for test environments, for development environments, and other environments too. Is it great for environments that are super predictable, don't have a lot of ups and downs in terms of utilization? Maybe not. Maybe that is a better workload to be either on-premise or in a data center. And so really it's about, just like anything else, making sure that we understand the environment, the use case, the client, and then making the best recommendation for them. And most often that means it's some sort of hybrid environment. Some stuff stays premise, some stuff moves cloud.
So are there cost benefits to one side or the other, cloud or on-prem?
Yeah, but by and large, unless you're seeing rapid scale up and scale down, over 3 to 5 years, it's more cost effective to stay on premise. Now, just like anything, there's some trade-offs to that in terms of ensuring that your environment's secure and that you've got everything you need in order to ensure that your premise infrastructure is secure and available. So the reality is really more about upfront expenditure, fix that CapEx versus a OpEx kind of spend. And so the CapEx is going to be less over 3 to 5 years typically. Again, unless you're talking about a lot of rapid ups and downs and needing to, spin up test environments and development environments and things like that, then certainly, having to do that kind of thing on an on-premise basis becomes extremely cost prohibitive, and that's where cloud makes a whole lot of sense in that way. But for traditional environments for small and medium-sized customers, often that some version or hybrid version of a premise is going to be more cost effective over a longer period of time.
Now, where do you see Cadan's strengths? I mean, when in this environment where people are still migrating, and that's just one element of it, right? Cloud. There's also the elements of mobile device management. There's a sort of cybersecurity. What is your elevator pitch? What do you tell your prospective customers if they're watching this show?
Yeah, great question, and appreciate the question very much. For us, the greatest benefit we believe in working with Cadan Technologies is our process and our philosophy. Let me talk about the process first. We always do an assessment on the front end of any engagement with any customer from a managed services perspective. You're always going to get an IT assessment on your network, and you're going to get a security assessment. And that's really valuable for a couple of different reasons. Number one, we evaluate your current state, security, and network comprehensively. How do we know where we need to go unless we have a really sound understanding of where we are? Number two, we make recommendations based on two standards: risk of unplanned downtime and risk of security breach. And then we're going to prioritize our recommendations on SEV 1, SEV 2, and SEV 3 based on those two standards. So now we have a roadmap in terms of the things that we need to execute on in order to have an environment that is stable and resistant to unplanned downtime and secure. Now, we don't require customers take action on these, but we do recommend them. And some recommendations are like, we recommend you wear a parachute if you jump out of an airplane. You don't have to, but it's a good idea.
No, that's great. And by the way, I looked at your Google ratings for Cadan. They're 5-star, and I was like, wow, this is so rare. I have not seen 5-star ratings for businesses for a very long time. So congratulations.
Thank you.
I think it speaks to your leadership and your culture.
Indeed, and the other piece, Khurram, if I may, is that we're not a one-size-fits-all kind of organization. So we're not going to forklift you. We're not going to put you into a box that may or may not be a good fit for you. We're going to walk with you from where you are today to get you where you want to be from an IT perspective, from a security perspective, so that your IT not only just doesn't get in the way of what you're trying to do organizationally, but actually enables you and enables you to be able to achieve your organizational objectives.
No, I think that's very important. I think the fact that IT is now entering businesses that were traditionally non-tech for the longest time, and it's no longer a question of if, it's a question of when, right? I mean, you have to. The productivity gains are very obvious these days, right? I mean, there are line of business applications that are proliferating through different verticals. So one way or the other, you have to become a digital organization. I mean, that's what VCs like to say: software is eating the world, right? So that's actually happening right now. You're spoon feeding the software. Name the top three, or one, two, or three problems that you see in the security space. What kind of calls are you getting from your customers? What's happening? What are some issues that you see most in the field?
Most often what we're seeing is credential breach. That's far and away the most common breach, as it were, that we see. And really, that's a function of a user unwittingly forking over their credentials to a bad actor. It's not generally a sophisticated hack of a network. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and it's a low return kind of game. And mostly to the credit of firewall vendors and your Microsofts of the world doing a really good job keeping their software and firmware up to date. But what hackers have realized is they can craft really sophisticated phishing and spearing campaigns, and they will absolutely get credentials off of that. And they'll get credentials that give them access to data and a network so that they can profit. And the reality is it's not your Nigerian prince email anymore, okay? That's not what people are getting. They're getting emails that look just like your Office 365 login, that look just like your Salesforce login. And unless you become a detective, and really, that's what we have to do in large part, unless you have good systems in place that can help you. And that's part of what we do with organizations that we work with. But you really have to be very critical of the messages that you receive and ensure that the sender is legit. And that's the biggest thing that we're seeing is that credential hack. So those credentials get forked over, and any number of things can happen at that point. They can crypto lock the environment. They can take data that is sensitive and dump it on the black market. They can ransom on the data. They can ransom on keeping your network down, or all of the above, right? Once they're in the network. And so what we do is we help organizations understand that that's really fundamentally the greatest risk that we see. And we help them get to a place where credential breach is almost impossible to do.
So let's say I'm a business and I have received some phishing messages that have tried to sort of get the credentials from me, but nothing bad has happened, and I call you up and I'm like, oh, so how would you work with me? And let's say we are going to have Cadan work with us on all of our IT. Where would you start?
First thing we would do is we would look at the message and address the fire, right? Makes sense to address the fire in the immediate situation first before we, talk about how we put better locks on the house, right? If you've got a kitchen fire, you're probably not going to want to listen to a conversation about how to upgrade the locks on your front door, right? And so we address the email at hand or whatever the situation is at hand. In that instance, we would take some education, an educational approach, and look at the email and say this came not from Office 365, but actually a Gmail address. And this doesn't actually take you to 365. It takes you to, a credential harvesting site. And then we would look at adopting some strategies that would help mitigate this in the future. Two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication being the biggest thing that we recommend generally in those kinds of situations. Let's make sure that we have global multi-factor authentication across the environment so that if a user does unwittingly hand over their credentials without that additional factor, that bad actor is not getting in.
So let's make the situation a little bit worse. So what if a hack has already happened? So what would be your process in that situation? How would you mitigate?
Great question. So that goes into then our mitigation and response. So immediately we're going to deploy tools to mitigate the attack and mitigate the breach. We're going to isolate any network devices that are online that have not been breached at this point. So it really becomes a containment effort and then a restoration effort at that point. Do we have backups that we can resort to? So we go through a systematic process of containment and then restoration of systems and data, because that's what we're trying to do at that point. We've been breached, and there is some fallout, whether that be ransomware, cryptoware, whatever that is, or some sort of agent that is calling home to take data away. And we're going to isolate, contain, and then restore.
With that, let's talk about the biggest rage of the day, artificial intelligence. And my hunch is that, so I look at it two ways, right? So there's the positive applications of AI, and then there's the negative applications of AI, which would be on this. So on the positive side, my hunch is that you're not seeing that much changing on your day-to-day operations as you're working, because the way people are using AI today, if somebody's using open, chat GPT or things like that, it's not substantively different from a managed services perspective. Is that correct?
That's true. In that AI right now really, I think, has two implications right now from a managed IT services perspective. We understand that AI has enhanced our tools in a variety of ways and will continue to do that, and that's a benefit. And so to the extent that AI can benefit our ability to identify and contain or eliminate threats from a security perspective, we're all on board. We think that's a wonderful use and the perfect use for AI. Similarly, we see AI in our client environments in a variety of ways, and then we think that's going to grow exponentially. And it'll grow in a positive way. It's a tool, just like any other tool. And right now it's primarily on the client side, a language model and a data analytic kind of model. The doom and the gloom and the fear around it, I think, is much more around the next generation of AI that we haven't seen yet. And so we hear a lot about it, and we hear if this thing becomes smarter than us, we're doomed. And that might be. But that's not today. That's not the reality that we're living in today. What I do think right now is the greatest real threat right now when it comes to AI is if we see, and I should rephrase that, not if, when we see bad actors start utilizing AI in their campaigns around phishing and spearing. Because if you think they're good now, just wait until we get language models working on their behalf, generating extremely sophisticated emails, chats, LinkedIn messages of all variety in one single effort to get into client environments, to get into organizations, whether those be businesses, whether those be governments, whatever that be. That's the real threat.
So now I'm seeing that in the industry there's the MSP, and then there's the a new breed called MSSP. Now that doesn't have to be a new breed; it could be just a sort of a transition from MSP to MSSP. Do you think the field of cybersecurity would grow to a point where it has to become a specialization, or do you think the current MSPs would be migrating towards MSSPs?
The latter. If MSPs want to survive, they better also be security MSPs. I think certainly there's a space for just security MSPs to some extent or another, but you can't be an MSP without also addressing security in some way, especially because the blocking and tackling of MSPs from a help desk perspective and from a monitoring and management really is intrinsically tied to security, right? So everything we do is in some way or another tied out to IT security, and ultimately the goal of maximum uptime for the organization, in whether that be backup and disaster recovery, whether that be real-time monitoring and patching and updating, and whether that be security operations center and advanced email filtering. All of that's all really tied together in the overall mission of ensuring maximum uptime for the organization.
No, that's very some very key points you highlighted there, Charles. Thank you. So moving on. I have a list of questions, and I think these would be, when I was a product manager, I really dug for this information. Now that I have you in the podcast, I'm going to ask these questions from the ultimate source, right? So, Teams or Zoom?
Teams.
Why
no question. That's it. That's all you get. Teams.
Okay. All right.
No. The reason Teams is because of the native integration with the M365 stack. I just feel like this too is another thing that benefits from that. And the outlier being Internet Explorer and Edge. That'll never, despite how hard Microsoft tries, rapid adoption of that and wide adoption of that, for some reason, this is not going to be a thing. But we saw it with many things within the Microsoft evolution. And this is another one of those things that really just benefits from being a part of the ecosystem. And I just feel like the native integration with OneDrive and Power BI and SharePoint and the rest of the Microsoft suite, Teams benefits from all of that.
I was going to ask you my next question, but I'm just going to skip because I think you already answered that. And then my next question was Google Workspace for Microsoft 365. So we kind of know the answer. Okay. As an MSP, what's your most effective marketing channel? How do you acquire customers?
Oh, it's far and away the most effective is customer referral. And that for us has been the gold standard. And we are embarking on a campaign to really supercharge that for us and get better as an organization at asking clients for referrals and making it easier for them to refer Cadan Technologies, rather than just saying, "Will you refer us?" Getting a little bit more specific around the ask and being more intentional about it.
Do you think trade shows are an effective customer acquisition channel for you?
They have not been historically for us, but that doesn't mean they can't be. Again, it's about ensuring that when we engage in these activities that we're intentional around what we're trying to accomplish, instead of just shaking hands and giving out business cards and then hoping you get some phone calls, right? Are we being intentional about what we're trying to accomplish from an organizational perspective?
Okay, name top 3 vendors that come to your mind when I say PSA.
Professional service automation. So ConnectWise for sure is ServiceNow is a big one, as well as Enable.
What's your top of mind tech stack for cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think from a client-facing perspective, we see Arctic Wolf a ton, we see SentinelOne a ton, and we see probably the big mail filtering house out there, and now it's slipping me, so I'll default to a non-mail filtering vendor, right? But Huntress probably being the other one that we feel like is a lesser known but extremely effective.
Okay, what advice would you give to someone who is just starting in MSP? Would it be don't or something else?
Yeah. If you're just starting, that's a great question. Wow. Okay. Well, the single greatest piece of advice I could give somebody who is starting an MSP would be decide what you are going to focus on, what you're going to be really good at, and focus on those elements, right? Instead of trying to be everything to everybody, ensure that you're laser focused on what you want to be good at and offer the market. And in the flip side of that coin is what markets would be most would benefit from those services the most, right? So those two, so I cheated. Two things. But again, decide what you want to focus on strategically the most, and then what markets would be best served by that.
Sounds good. Thank you. And so now a couple of leadership questions. As a leader in your company, a services organization, the toughest organizations of any kind, how do you take time for off for yourself? How do you relax?
No, great question.
How do you create a work-life balance? Yes.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'm a huge work-life balance person, and that's for a lot of reasons, but I insist on taking a walk with my dog every day, no matter what. I don't care what's going on. I don't care how busy I am. I insist on going out on a daily walk at lunch with, sometimes not. If it's too hot, then the dog stays home. He's getting a little older now, right? And so I insist on that. My best ideas always come when I'm walking. And then I have a meditation practice in the morning. So my spirituality is a big piece for me. And I ensure that I do journaling and meditation and prayer in the morning. And we'll keep this business focused, but all of that is really critical for me in the morning in order to ensure that I am at my best each day.
Wow, those are all very effective techniques, I would say. Based on what I've read, all three of them are very, very effective. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
And okay, last question, Charles. So as a leader, as somebody who's been in the industry, share with us something, a lesson that you have learned around life or around leadership. So whatever comes to your mind.
So if I get up every day, and this is true, and I work as hard as I can to be of service to every individual that I engage with, and that for sure extends to all of the employees at Cadan Technologies. And my mission is to make you successful, to help you succeed. Then the rest of it takes care of itself. And so it's not about trying to get the most out of an employee necessarily, as it is how can I support you and give you everything you need in order to be successful. And if I'm doing that on a regular basis across our employees, we will be successful, and I will be too, by default. Okay? So not getting up every day and trying to figure out how I'm going to be successful, but how do I make you successful? And I feel the same way when it comes to customers. How do I help you be successful? Because if I help you be successful, I know that the rest of it will take care of itself. Right? And if I can get that message across to my employees and to my clients, there is a dynamic there that really ends up being a productive dynamic across the board.
That's beautiful. That's absolutely. I think that's a very touching message, and that's a very right message for what you're doing in the services sector. With that, thank you so much, Charles. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we will have you more times around as the industry around us changes, and when Apple launches its augmented reality devices. I think we should gather again and see where AI takes us next year or in the years coming. But with that, thank you so much, and I really appreciate it.
Karim, I appreciate that very much, and I'm all on board with the Apple augmented reality if they can just solve the 2-hour battery pack issue. I think that's really the Achilles heel. But Karim, thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you.